I need to tell you something about yourself that you've been getting wrong for years. Something that will completely change how you see your struggles, your failures, and your inability to do the things you know you should do. You're not lazy. You've never been lazy. You're terrified. Every time you've called yourself lazy for not pursuing your goals, you were wrong. Every time you've beaten yourself up for procrastinating, you misdiagnosed the problem. Every time you've wondered why you can't just do the things you know you need to do, you've been looking at the symptom instead of the cause. You're not lacking discipline. You're not lacking motivation. You're not fundamentally broken or flawed. You're scared, deeply, persistently, overwhelmingly scared. And your brain has learned to disguise that fear as laziness, because laziness feels like a character flaw you could fix with willpower, while fear feels like a weakness you have to hide. Right now, you probably have goals you're not pursuing, projects you're not starting, opportunities you're not taking, conversations you're not having, changes you're not making. And you've been telling yourself it's because you're lazy, because you lack discipline, because you're just not the kind of person who follows through. But think about what happens when you try to work on those goals. When you sit down to start that project, when you think about taking that opportunity, what do you actually feel? Not laziness, fear. Fear that you'll fail, fear that you'll succeed and then have to maintain it, fear that you're not good enough, fear that others will judge you, fear that you'll be exposed as incompetent, fear that you'll waste time on something that doesn't work, fear that you'll look foolish, fear that you'll disappoint yourself or others. Fear, fear, fear. And what does your brain do with all that fear? It creates avoidance. It generates procrastination. It produces what looks exactly like laziness. Because avoiding the thing you're scared of provides immediate relief from the fear. Not doing the thing means you don't have to face the possibility of failure, judgment, or inadequacy. So you avoid. You procrastinate. You do anything except the thing you're scared of, and then you call yourself lazy. You beat yourself up for lacking discipline. You conclude there's something wrong with your character, and you try to fix the problem with willpower, motivation videos, and productivity systems. But you can't fix fear with discipline. You can't overcome terror with willpower. You can't solve avoidance caused by fear by just trying harder. Because the problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough. The problem is that you're scared and you're treating that fear like it's laziness. Think about the things you do easily and consistently. The things that require no willpower. The things you never procrastinate on. What do those things have in common? You're not afraid of them. When there's no fear, there's no avoidance. When you're not scared, you don't need discipline to act. You just act. The difference between the things you do easily and the things you avoid isn't your level of motivation or discipline. It's your level of fear. My name doesn't matter, but my misdiagnosis does. Because I spent 35 years calling myself lazy, beating myself up for procrastinating, trying to fix my character flaws with discipline and willpower, and none of it worked because I wasn't lazy. I was terrified, and I didn't know it. Until I learned to recognize fear masquerading as laziness. Until I learned to break the fear cycle instead of fighting the laziness cycle. Until everything changed. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how fear disguises itself as laziness in your life. I'm going to reveal the specific fears that are keeping you stuck. I'm going to share how I broke my own fear cycle. And most importantly, I'm going to give you the exact framework to recognize your fears, address them directly, and stop mistaking terror for laziness. But I need you to be ready for something uncomfortable. Recognizing that you're not lazy means recognizing that you're scared, and admitting fear feels more vulnerable than admitting laziness. Laziness is a character flaw. Fear is an emotion. And emotions can feel harder to face than flaws. Are you ready to face your fear? Are you ready to stop calling yourself lazy? Are you ready to break the fear cycle? Then let's begin. Because you're not lazy. You've never been lazy, you're just terrified. And it's time to do something about that. Let me take you to the moment I realized I wasn't lazy, I was terrified. I was 35 years old, sitting at my desk on a Saturday morning, staring at my laptop, completely unable to start the project I'd been planning to start for 6 months. The project was writing a business proposal for a consulting service I wanted to launch. I had researched it thoroughly. I had outlined the service. I had identified potential clients. All I needed to do was write the proposal and start reaching out to people. But I couldn't start. Every Saturday for 6 months, I'd sit at my desk, open my laptop, stare at the blank document, and then find something else to do. Check email, browse social media, clean my apartment, run errands, anything except write the proposal. And I called myself lazy. I told myself I lacked discipline. I concluded I didn't really want this business if I couldn't even write a proposal. I beat myself up for wasting 6 months procrastinating on something that should take a few hours. On this particular Saturday, I was doing the same thing, staring at the blank document, feeling the familiar pull to do anything else, about to click away and check my email for the 1,000th time. But instead, I paused, and I asked myself a different question. Not why am I so lazy, but what am I actually feeling right now? And the answer came immediately, clearly, undeniably. I was terrified. I was terrified that the proposal would reveal I didn't know what I was doing, terrified that potential clients would reject me, terrified that I'd launch this business and fail publicly, terrified that I'd waste time and money on something that didn't work, terrified that I wasn't good enough to succeed at this. The blank document wasn't just a blank document. It was a portal to potential failure, rejection, and humiliation. And my brain was desperately trying to protect me from that danger by creating avoidance that looked exactly like laziness. I wasn't lazy, I was scared. And I had been misdiagnosing my fear as laziness for 35 years. Let me show you the specific ways fear had been masquerading as laziness in my life, because I guarantee fear is disguising itself as laziness in your life right now. Fear disguise 1, procrastination on important projects. I would procrastinate endlessly on projects that mattered to me. Writing projects, business ideas, career moves, creative pursuits. I'd plan them, research them, think about them constantly, but never actually start them. I called this laziness. I'm too lazy to follow through. I lack the discipline to execute my ideas. But it wasn't laziness, it was fear. Fear that starting the project would expose my incompetence. Fear that finishing it would lead to judgment and criticism. Fear that the project would fail and prove I wasn't as capable as I hoped. Every important project came with the risk of discovering painful truths about myself, so I avoided starting them. Fear disguise. 2, abandoning projects after small setbacks. When I did manage to start important projects, I'd abandon them at the first sign of difficulty. If something didn't work perfectly immediately, I'd quit. I'd tell myself it wasn't worth pursuing. I'd move on to something else. I called this laziness. I'm too lazy to push through difficulties. I lack the persistence to overcome obstacles. But it wasn't laziness. It was fear. Fear that the difficulty was evidence I couldn't succeed. Fear that continuing would lead to more failure and more proof of inadequacy. Small setbacks felt like confirmation that I should quit before I experienced bigger, more humiliating failures. So I abandoned projects as soon as they got difficult. Fear disguise 3, consuming instead of creating. I spent enormous amounts of time consuming content about the things I wanted to do, reading books about writing instead of writing, watching videos about entrepreneurship instead of building a business, researching strategies instead of implementing them. I called this laziness. I'm too lazy to actually do the work. I prefer the easy consumption over the hard creation. But it wasn't laziness. It was fear. fear of creating something that would be judged, fear of putting my work into the world where it could be criticized. Consuming felt safe because I was in the audience, not on the stage. Creating felt dangerous because it required vulnerability. So I stayed in endless preparation mode where I could feel productive without risking exposure. Fear disguise 4. Only doing things I already know how to do. I would stay in my zone of existing competence. I'd take on projects I knew I could complete successfully. I'd avoid anything new or unfamiliar where I'd be a beginner or might fail. I called this laziness. I'm too lazy to learn new things. I lacked the motivation to challenge myself. But it wasn't laziness, it was fear. Fear of being incompetent at something new. Fear of the vulnerability of being a beginner. Fear of failing publicly at something I'd never done before. Staying in my competence zone felt safe. Attempting new things felt terrifying. So I avoided growth opportunities disguised as lacking motivation. Fear disguise 5. Perfectionism, preventing action. I would spend excessive time planning, preparing, and perfecting before taking action. I'd revise documents endlessly without ever sending them. I'd plan projects exhaustively without ever starting them. I'd wait for perfect conditions that never arrived. I called this laziness or procrastination. I'm too lazy to just act. I waste time overthinking instead of doing. But it wasn't laziness, it was fear. Fear that imperfect action would lead to failure or judgment. Fear that starting before everything was perfect would expose my inadequacy. Endless preparation felt like productivity while protecting me from the vulnerability of putting imperfect work into the world. So I perfected and prepared and never acted. Fear disguise 6. Social avoidance that looked like introversion. I would avoid networking events, skip social gatherings, decline opportunities to meet new people. I tell myself I was just introverted and preferred alone time. I call this a personality trait. I'm just introverted, I don't like socializing. But much of it wasn't introversion. It was fear. Fear of social judgment, fear of saying something foolish, fear of being rejected or disliked, fear of not knowing what to say, fear of being boring or awkward. Real introversion is about energy and preference. Fear-based avoidance is about terror disguised as preference. I was avoiding social situations because they scared me, then calling it introversion. Fear disguise 7. Staying in unsatisfying situations. I stayed in a job I didn't like for years. I stayed in relationships that didn't fulfill me. I stayed in living situations I'd outgrown. I tell myself I was just being practical or that leaving would be too much effort. I called this pragmatism or lethargy. I'm too lazy to make changes. It's easier to stay where I am. But it wasn't laziness or pragmatism. It was fear. Fear that leaving would lead to worse situations. Fear that change would reveal I couldn't handle new challenges. Fear that I'd fail at building something better. Fear that staying was safer than risking the unknown. So I stayed stuck and called it practicality. Fear disguise 8. Diminishing my own goals and dreams. When people asked about my goals, I'd minimize them. I'd describe small, easily achievable goals rather than the bigger dreams I actually had. I'd downplay my ambitions. I called this humility or realism. I'm being realistic about what's achievable. I don't want to seem arrogant. But it wasn't humility. It was fear. Fear that stating my real goals out loud would create expectations I couldn't meet. Fear that others would judge my ambitions as unrealistic or laugh at me for dreaming big. Fear that admitting what I really wanted would make eventual failure more visible and painful. So I made my goals smaller to protect myself from the vulnerability of wanting something significant. These 8 patterns controlled my life for 35 years. Every single pattern looked like laziness, lack of discipline, or character flaws. But every single pattern was actually fear disguised as something else. I wasn't procrastinating on important projects because I was lazy. I was avoiding them because they terrified me. I wasn't abandoning projects because I lacked persistence. I was fleeing them because small failures scared me. I wasn't consuming instead of creating because I preferred easy over hard. I was hiding in the audience because performing scared me. I wasn't staying in my comfort zone because I lacked motivation. I was avoiding new challenges because being a beginner scared me. I wasn't perfecting endlessly because I was overthinking. I was delaying action because imperfection scared me. I wasn't avoiding social situations just because I was introverted. I was avoiding them because social judgment scared me. I wasn't staying in unsatisfying situations because I was lazy. I was staying because change scared me. I wasn't minimizing my goals because I was humble. I was protecting myself because wanting big things scared me. Fear. Every single behavior that looked like laziness was actually fear. And I had spent 35 years trying to fix laziness with discipline when the real problem was fear. Discipline doesn't cure fear. Willpower doesn't overcome terror. Productivity systems don't address the underlying problem of being scared. That Saturday morning, staring at the blank document for the business proposal, I finally saw clearly. I needed to address my fear, not fix my laziness. I needed to break the fear cycle, not strengthen my discipline. And once I saw that, everything changed. That Saturday morning, after recognizing I was terrified instead of lazy, I did something different. Instead of trying to force myself to write through the fear, I addressed the fear directly. I closed the blank document and I opened a new one. And I wrote at the top, "What am I actually afraid of?" And then I wrote honestly, not what I thought I should be afraid of, what I was actually afraid of. I'm afraid this proposal will reveal I don't know what I'm doing. I'm afraid potential clients will read it and think it's amateurish or stupid. I'm afraid I'll send it to people and they'll reject me. I'm afraid I'll launch this business and it will fail and I'll have wasted time and money. I'm afraid that failure will prove I'm not as capable as I think I am. I'm afraid of discovering I'm not good enough. Writing these fears down made them visible. And once they were visible, I could see how irrational most of them were. Fear. This proposal will reveal I don't know what I'm doing. Reality. I've researched this service for 6 months. I have relevant experience. I do know what I'm doing, at least enough to start. And even if the proposal isn't perfect, it's a starting point I can improve. Fear. Potential clients will think it's stupid. Reality. Some might, but some might be interested. And their judgment of my proposal isn't a judgment of my worth as a person. It's feedback about a business document. I can handle feedback. Fear. People will reject me. Reality. Yes, most people will say no. That's how business development works. Rejection is normal and expected. It's not personal. It's just part of the process. Fear. The business will fail. Reality. It might. Many businesses fail. But failure at a business attempt isn't failure as a person. It's just discovering that this particular approach didn't work. I can learn from it and try something else. Fear. Failure will prove I'm not capable. Reality. Failure proves I tried. Not trying proves nothing except that I was too scared to attempt. Every successful person has multiple failures. Failure is evidence of courage, not inadequacy. Fear. I'll discover I'm not good enough. Reality. Good enough for what? Perfect success on the first attempt? Nobody is good enough for that. I'm good enough to try. I'm good enough to learn. I'm good enough to improve through failure. That's all I need. Once I examined my fears explicitly, they lost most of their power. They went from overwhelming, nameless dread to specific, addressable concerns. And most of those concerns were either irrational or manageable. Then I did something else. I asked, What's the worst realistic outcome if I write this proposal and send it out? Worst realistic outcome. I send the proposal to 20 people. All 20 say no. I feel disappointed and embarrassed. I conclude this particular service isn't what people want. I've spent maybe 40 hours total on this effort. That's 40 hours of learning what doesn't work. Is that outcome survivable? Absolutely. Is it worth avoiding? No. Is it worth 6 months of procrastination? Definitely not. Then I asked, what's the best realistic outcome? Best realistic outcome. I send the proposal to 20 people. 3 say yes. I launch the service with 3 clients. I learn what works and what doesn't. I improve the service. I gradually build a successful consulting business doing work I enjoy. Is that outcome possible? Yes. Is it worth pursuing? Absolutely. Then I ask, what's the guaranteed outcome if I continue avoiding this? Guaranteed outcome. 6 months from now, I'll still be sitting at this desk, staring at this blank document, calling myself lazy, having built nothing. Once I saw all 3 outcomes clearly, the decision was obvious. The worst realistic outcome was survivable. The best realistic outcome was desirable. The guaranteed outcome of continued avoidance was unacceptable. So I wrote the proposal. Not perfectly, not after more preparation. Right then, I wrote a draft in 3 hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. And the fear that had paralyzed me for 6 months evaporated the moment I started acting. That was the pattern I learned. Fear is powerful when it's vague and avoided. Fear loses power when it's named and faced. Over the next year, I applied this pattern to every area where I'd been calling myself lazy. Fear breaking 2. I wanted to start a podcast, but had been too lazy for 2 years. I examined the fear. I was terrified my voice would sound bad, that nobody would listen, that people would judge my content, that I'd run out of things to say. I named these fears explicitly. I examined them rationally. I assessed realistic outcomes. Then I recorded and published episode 1. It wasn't perfect. My voice did sound weird to me. But nobody died. Nobody even criticized it. 5 people listened. That was enough to continue. After 1 year, I had 50 episodes and 2,000 regular listeners. All because I broke the fear cycle instead of fighting the laziness cycle. Fear breaking 3. I wanted to reach out to potential mentors in my field, but had been too lazy to do so. I examined the fear. I was terrified they'd ignore me, that I'd seem presumptuous, that I'd waste their time, that they'd think my questions were stupid. I named these fears. I examined them. I realized the worst outcome was they'd say no or not respond. That was survivable. So I reached out to 5 people. 3 didn't respond. 2 said yes. Those 2 mentor relationships changed my career trajectory. All because I addressed fear instead of blaming laziness. Fear breaking 4. I wanted to take an art class, but had been too lazy for 5 years. I examined the fear. I was terrified of being the worst in class, of producing bad work, of looking foolish as a beginner adult in a room full of people with talent. I named these fears. I recognized most were irrational. I enrolled in the class. I was indeed a beginner. My work was indeed rough, and it was wonderful. Being bad at something new while learning was liberating. The fear of being a beginner had kept me from learning for 5 years. Breaking that fear cycle opened up learning opportunities I'd been avoiding forever. Fear breaking 5. I wanted to have an honest conversation with a friend about feeling hurt by something they'd done. I'd been too lazy to bring it up for months. I examined the fear. I was terrified of conflict, of damaging the friendship, of seeming oversensitive, of their defensive reaction. I named these fears. I recognized that avoiding the conversation was damaging the friendship more than having it would. I had the conversation. It was uncomfortable, but the friendship improved. The months of resentment dissolved. all because I faced the fear of conflict instead of hiding behind avoidance, labeled as laziness. As I broke fear cycle after fear cycle, a pattern emerged. Every area where I'd been calling myself lazy was actually an area where I was terrified. And once I started addressing fear directly instead of blaming laziness, I started acting. I wasn't becoming more disciplined. I wasn't developing more willpower. I wasn't fixing my character flaws. I was just recognizing fear, examining it, and acting despite it. And the transformation was remarkable. Within 1 year, I had written and sent the business proposal, launched the consulting service with 5 clients, started and maintained the podcast with 50 episodes, connected with 2 valuable mentors, completed the art class and continued learning, repaired multiple relationships through honest conversations, pursued 4 other goals I'd been too lazy to pursue for years. None of this required superhuman discipline. None of it required massive willpower. It just required recognizing fear and breaking the fear cycle. After transforming from someone paralyzed by fear, disguised as laziness, to someone who could recognize and break fear cycles, I developed what I call the fear-breaking framework. This is the system that helps you identify when laziness is actually fear and gives you the tools to address that fear directly. The framework has 7 components, and each one is essential. Component 1, the laziness audit. You need to identify specifically where you're calling yourself lazy, because most of that laziness is actually fear. The practice. Make a list of everything you've been calling yourself lazy about. Areas where you procrastinate, projects you're not starting, goals you're not pursuing, changes you're not making, opportunities you're not taking. Write at least 10 items. Use this format. I'm being lazy about this specific thing. Example, I'm being lazy about starting my business. Example, I'm being lazy about working out regularly. Example, I'm being lazy about networking. This list identifies all the places where you might be misdiagnosing fear as laziness. My initial audit had 23 items, 23 areas where I'd been calling myself lazy for months or years. Component 2, the fear translation. For each item on your laziness list, you need to translate it from laziness language to fear language. The practice. For each I'm being lazy about X statement, rewrite it as I'm afraid of X because. Force yourself to complete the sentence with specific fears. Example, I'm being lazy about starting my business becomes I'm afraid of starting my business because I'm afraid it will fail and prove I'm not capable. I'm afraid people will judge my attempt. I'm afraid I'll waste time and money. Example, I'm being lazy about working out becomes I'm afraid of working out because I'm afraid I'll look foolish at the gym. I'm afraid I'll be bad at it. I'm afraid I'll fail to stick with it and prove I lack discipline. This translation reveals the actual fear underneath the laziness label. When I did this translation for my 23 items, I discovered I wasn't lazy about any of them. I was terrified of all of them. Every single lazy item was actually a fear item. Component 3, the fear examination. Once you've identified your fears, you need to examine them rationally. Most fears are either irrational or manageable. The practice. For each fear, ask 4 questions. Is this fear based on reality or assumption? Many fears are based on imagined worst-case scenarios, not actual likely outcomes. What evidence do I have that this fear is justified? Often you'll find you have no real evidence, just vague anxiety. What's the worst realistic outcome? Not the catastrophic fantasy, the realistic worst case. Is that worst realistic outcome survivable? Usually it is. Example, fear. Starting my business will reveal I'm not capable. Examination. This is based on assumption, not reality. I have no evidence that I'm incapable. I've never tried. Worst realistic outcome. The business doesn't work and I learn from it. That's survivable and even valuable. This examination shrinks fears from overwhelming to manageable. Component 4, the outcome comparison. You need to compare 3 outcomes: worst realistic outcome of acting, best realistic outcome of acting, and guaranteed outcome of continued avoidance. The practice. For each fear, write, worst realistic outcome if I act. What's the worst likely thing that happens if I do this thing I'm afraid of? Best realistic outcome if I act. What's the best likely thing that happens? Guaranteed outcome if I continue avoiding. What definitely happens if I stay stuck? Example for starting a business. Worst, I invest time and money. The business doesn't work. I learn what doesn't work. I try something else. Best, the business succeeds. I build income doing work I enjoy. I develop valuable skills and experience. Guaranteed avoidance outcome. I stay stuck in unfulfilling work. I never learn whether the business could have worked. I continue calling myself lazy. This comparison usually reveals that avoiding is worse than attempting. Component 5, the fear-breaking action identification. Once you've examined your fear, you need to identify one small action you can take to break the fear cycle. The practice. Ask, what's the smallest action I could take that would prove I can act despite this fear? Not a perfect action, not a complete solution, just one small act that moves you from frozen to moving. Example, fear of starting business. Fear-breaking action. Write a 1-paragraph description of the business idea. That's it. Not a full business plan, just 1 paragraph. This proves I can take one step despite fear. Small fear-breaking actions build momentum. You prove to yourself that acting despite fear is possible and survivable. Component 6, the exposure practice. Fear diminishes with repeated exposure. You need to practice doing the thing you're afraid of until the fear decreases. The practice. Commit to doing the fear-inducing activity repeatedly, even while scared. I will do this scary thing X times before evaluating whether to continue. Example, I will go to the gym 15 times before evaluating whether to continue, even if I feel foolish every time. This commitment prevents you from quitting at the first uncomfortable exposure. It gives the exposure practice time to work. I committed to recording 20 podcast episodes before evaluating success. The fear was high for episodes 1 through 5. By episode 10, it was manageable. By episode 20, it was minimal. Exposure worked. Component 7, the compassionate reframe. You need to stop calling yourself lazy and start recognizing your fear with compassion. The practice. Every time you catch yourself thinking, I'm so lazy, immediately reframe. I'm not lazy. I'm scared of this specific thing. That's understandable. Everyone feels fear. I can act despite this fear. This reframe removes the shame of laziness and replaces it with compassionate recognition of fear. Shame paralyzes. Compassion enables action. When I stopped shaming myself for laziness and started recognizing my fear with compassion, acting became dramatically easier. Shame says you're broken, you can't act. Compassion says you're scared and you can act anyway. These 7 components create a complete system for identifying fear disguised as laziness, examining that fear rationally, and breaking the fear cycle through action. Now you understand how to recognize and break fear cycles. Let me give you the exact action plan to stop mistaking fear for laziness and start acting despite fear. Action 1. Complete your laziness audit this week. Make a list of everything you've been calling yourself lazy about. Every project you're not starting, every goal you're not pursuing, every change you're not making. Write at least 10 items. Get them visible. Action 2. Translate one laziness item to fear. Choose your most costly laziness area, the one where procrastination is hurting you most. Rewrite it. I'm not being lazy about X, I'm afraid of X, because. Complete the sentence with specific fears. Name what you're actually scared of. Action 3. Examine that fear rationally. Ask the 4 examination questions. Is this fear based on reality or assumption? What evidence do I have? What's the worst realistic outcome? Is that survivable? Write your answers. Most fears collapse under rational examination. Action 4. Compare the 3 outcomes. Write the worst realistic outcome of acting, best realistic outcome of acting, and guaranteed outcome of continued avoidance. See clearly that avoiding is worse than attempting. Action 5. Identify your first fear-breaking action. From your fear, what's the smallest action you could take this week that would prove you can act despite fear? Not a perfect action. Just one small step. Schedule it. Do it within 7 days. Action 6. Take that fear-breaking action despite the fear. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait for the fear to go away. Act while scared. This is the crucial step. Acting despite fear breaks the cycle. Waiting to feel brave perpetuates it. Action 7. Practice the compassionate reframe immediately. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I'm so lazy, immediately reframe. I'm not lazy. I'm scared of X. That's understandable. I can act despite this fear. Do this every single time. Replace shame with compassion. Action 8. Set up an exposure practice for one fear. Choose a fear that's limiting you significantly. Commit to doing the scary thing X times before evaluating. Write, I will do this thing X times, even if I'm scared every time, before deciding whether to continue. Action 9. Track your fear-breaking actions. Get a notebook. Title it Fear-Breaking Log. Every time you act despite fear, document. What I was afraid of, what action I took despite fear, what actually happened, how I feel now. This creates evidence that acting despite fear works. Action 10. Share your fear recognition with one person. Tell someone, I've been calling myself lazy about X, but I realized I'm not lazy, I'm afraid of Y. I'm going to act despite this fear. Saying it out loud makes the reframe real and creates accountability. Action 11. Examine one more laziness area per week. Every week, take another item from your laziness audit and translate it to fear. Then, examine, compare outcomes, and identify a fear-breaking action. Systematically address all your lazy areas as fear areas. Action 12. Schedule your weekly fear review. Block 1 hour every Sunday. Review. What fears did I recognize this week? What fear-breaking actions did I take? What fears am I still avoiding? What's my fear-breaking action for next week? This keeps you actively breaking fear cycles. Action 13. Create a fear statement mantra. Write, I'm not lazy. I'm not lacking discipline. I'm not broken. I'm scared of specific things. Fear is normal. I can recognize my fears and act despite them. Put this where you'll see it daily. Read it when you're tempted to call yourself lazy. Action 14. Find one example of someone who acted despite fear. Research someone who faced similar fears and acted anyway. Study what they did, how they recognized fear, how they acted despite it. Use their example as proof that fear-breaking works. Action 15. Commit to the fear-breaking lifestyle. Write, I commit to recognizing fear, instead of blaming laziness. I commit to examining my fears rationally. I commit to acting despite fear. I commit to stopping the shame cycle and starting the courage cycle. I will not waste years calling myself lazy when I'm actually scared. Sign it. Date it. Now, some of you are thinking, but what if I really am just lazy? What if it's not fear? What if I just don't have discipline? Here's my answer. Try the framework. If you're truly just lazy, examining the situation as fear won't hurt anything. But I predict that when you honestly ask, what am I afraid of? You'll discover fears you didn't realize were there. Very few people are genuinely lazy. Most people are scared and misdiagnosing it as laziness. The difference matters because you can't fix fear with discipline, but you can address fear directly and act anyway. Let me tell you where I am now, 6 years after I stopped calling myself lazy and started recognizing my fear. I'm 41 years old. I run a successful consulting business that started with that proposal I was too lazy to write. I've published over 300 podcast episodes that started with the episode I was too lazy to record. I've learned 6 new skills I was too lazy to pursue. I've had dozens of difficult conversations I was too lazy to initiate. I've taken opportunities I was too lazy to pursue. None of these things required me to become more disciplined. None required superhuman willpower. They just required me to recognize I wasn't lazy, I was scared, and to act despite that fear. 6 years ago, I was calling myself lazy about 23 different things. I was beating myself up constantly for my lack of discipline. I was convinced there was something fundamentally wrong with my character. I was stuck and getting more stuck because I was treating fear like a character flaw. Today, I still feel fear regularly, but I recognize it. I examine it. I act despite it. And I never call myself lazy. Here's what I learned. You're probably not lazy. I've met very few genuinely lazy people. Most people who call themselves lazy are actually terrified and misdiagnosing the problem. You're not procrastinating because you lack discipline. You're procrastinating because you're scared. You're not avoiding your goals because you lack motivation. You're avoiding them because they terrify you. You're not staying stuck because you're lazy. You're staying stuck because change scares you. The good news? Fear can be addressed. Fear can be examined. Fear can be faced. You can act despite fear, but you can't act despite fear until you recognize it's fear, not laziness. The difference between laziness and fear is everything. Laziness is a character flaw that implies you're broken. Fear is an emotion that implies you're human. Laziness requires fixing yourself. Fear requires recognizing the emotion and acting anyway. 6 years ago, I thought I was lazy. I tried to fix it with discipline and willpower. Nothing worked because I was treating the wrong problem. Today, I know I was never lazy. I was scared. And once I started treating fear like fear, instead of like laziness, I could finally move forward. Right now, you're probably calling yourself lazy about something. Some project you're not starting. Some goal you're not pursuing. Some change you're not making. And you're beating yourself up for your lack of discipline. But you're not lazy. You're scared. You're scared it won't work. You're scared you'll fail. You're scared you'll be judged. You're scared you're not good enough. You're scared of discovering painful truths. You're scared of something specific. And that fear is creating avoidance that looks exactly like laziness. But it's not laziness, it's fear. And the solution isn't more discipline. The solution is recognizing the fear, examining it, and acting despite it. What are you calling yourself lazy about right now? What project are you procrastinating on? What goal are you avoiding? Stop calling it laziness. Ask yourself, what am I actually afraid of? Name the fear. Examine it. Compare the outcomes. Take one small fear-breaking action. Do it while scared. That's how you break the fear cycle. Not by becoming more disciplined, by recognizing fear and acting anyway. 6 years ago, I was paralyzed by fears I was calling laziness. Today, I act despite fear regularly. My life transformed completely. Not because I became less lazy, I was never lazy. Because I became braver. I learned to recognize fear and act anyway. You're not lazy either. You're just terrified. And now you know what to do about it. Stop calling it laziness. Start calling it fear. Examine the fear. Act despite it. Break the fear cycle. That's where your life is waiting.